Hi everyone, welcome to another video. Today I want to share with you 9 different ways to mask different parts of your project. Now the first one I want to start off with talking about is masking paper. Now this comes in all different kinds. You can buy different brands. The one I like the best is Inkadinkadoo masking paper. This comes in a 12 pack. You can also buy it in larger sheets or rolls, but this is my favorite way to buy it just because of the little pouch. I can hang it up and store it on my pegboard, and it also stores all of my little scraps right inside there, so I can completely use up an entire sheet, because this can get a little pricey if you keep having to buy it over and over again. Here's a look at a full sheet of this. You have a white side and you also have a blue side. So to use this, you just stamp or die cut, whatever you want to do. You can fussy cut out if you stamp, and then you want to peel off the blue backing paper. And then that will stick down. It has a little tack on the back, and you can easily remove it when you're done. Now, in order to use this, a few tools, of course, are your scissors to do some fussy cutting, but also a pair of tweezers. The less you touch the back of this paper, the more uses you're going to get out of it. So I like to use my tweezers to kind of place this down and also to pull it up to keep the oils from my finger off of it. Then I place my used masks on the back of my stamp packaging, and that way I have them and I can find them very easily if I ever want to use them again. Here you can see a few that I've already used, and I have stored them on the back of this stamp set. Then whenever I want to use it again, I can just pull up that little image and it places very easily onto a piece of cardstock, you can see here. And this will stick quite a few times before you have to cut it out anymore. And those tweezers are really going to extend the life of your masks as well. And then I'll go ahead and pull this mask right back up with my tweezers again, and then I can just place it right back on that stamp packaging and store it away until I'm ready to use it again. Now here are a few cards that I have made where I've used this masking paper. Here I've used these little trolls, and I have stamped out and masked this entire scene with the masking paper. So I started off with the trolls, masked them, and then built up the scene behind them. So next I did the little road, the little log, I did some bushes, and then finally the trees, and then I could color that all in, and I've got this great card front that all it needed was some color, a sentiment, and it was ready to go. Now another one that I've used the masking paper on and created some scenes is this little troll guy. Now again, I just used some masking paper on the little gems, also on that little trolley on the side there, also on the bottom with the little hammer or the chisel and the bucket of jewels as well. Now one last card that I have used this on is the stamp set you see right there, the market stand stamp set. Now I masked out another scene completely, and I stamped out the little girl first, and then I went in with the little bushel and the flowers, the watermelon, and then I did the market stand completely behind that, and that just creates this really three-dimensional scene where all you need to do is stamping and then add some color. Now I've shown you some really in-depth mask scenes, but you can also do some really simple masking with this. Here you can see I used the unicorn stamp set from Craftin Desert Divas. I just used that along with the Build a Scene stamp set, and I created this tiny little scene that I did a little coloring, added a sentiment underneath, and it was a completely finished card. So masking paper is great for all of your dry type of masking, but when it comes to watercolor, you really need a masking fluid. This is my favorite. It's a liquid frisket. It's the Incredible White Mask is what it says on the bottle, but this is one of those tools I don't use often, but it's something I cannot replace with any other type of tool in my craft room. So it's one of those that is kind of irreplaceable. So whenever you open this jar, you can see you've got this really white liquid in there. It's almost a yellowy white. It will dry clear when you put it on, but you do need a few tools to use this with. You need a cheapo paintbrush. I use this one. It's tiny and it can get into little spaces on your stamped images. And also something that you don't technically need but makes it a little bit easier is an adhesive eraser. That's what that little square yellow thing is off to the right hand side. There have been many times where I've used this masking fluid, then I go back and try to remove it with my finger. some color will dry on top of it and then my finger smears it. That eraser is going to prevent that from happening. I'll show you how I use this later on in the video, but basically all you do is take some of that fluid, paint it over whatever you want to mask, and then you let it dry. It will dry clear so you'll know it's ready to go. Then when you're ready to remove it, you just roll it up with that eraser. It's that simple. Moving on to rubber cement. This is my favorite way to mask my digital stamps. You can also use it with your regular stamps. You can use it for little die cuts you want to place down as well. This is a temporary adhesive that easily removes off your paper. So I like to use this also with my adhesive eraser once I'm finished with it. So that is one tool that is helpful with this. But for this, all I do normally with my digital stamps is once I print out my paper on my cardstock, I'll run it through again with just regular computer paper. Then I can fussy cut it out just like I would with masking paper, but of course computer paper doesn't have a sticky back. So I put a little layer of this on the back. I can place it down wherever I want it. Then when it's time to remove it, all I have to do is peel up that paper, and then I use my adhesive eraser to get rid of any leftover residue that's left behind. Now, like I said before, you can use this technique with your regular stamps like I did here with this little sloth from the Happy Camper stamp set and did some distress inking around him. Or like I did here with this fall leaves, the boy fall leaves. He's a digital stamp and I did the same exact technique with rubber cement as I did with the regular stamp, so it works both ways. Next I want to talk about Glossy Accents, Nouveau Drops, and Enamel Accents. Now these are all pretty similar types of product, and this is a non-removable form of masking. So the ones I like to use the most are of course the clear Glossy Accents and the clear Nouveau Drops. Now, this is great if you have something, an object that you want to mask with that clear, shiny surface on it that you don't want removed later on. So I'm thinking like balloons or maybe a snow cone or some ice cream, something like that, where it's going to have that shiny surface. And this is going to go on there, create that nice hard surface, and then resist any watercolor or inks you try to put over it. But again, this isn't going to come off, so this is going to be your permanent type of masking. Now, you can also use a paintbrush to paint this on with, squirt a little out on a piece of paper, and paint that on to get in those nice tight corners. And I wanted to show you a few cards I've used this on. Again, this little sloth card, I went ahead and stamped the moon and the stars from that same Happy Camper stamp set, and I added some glossy accents over that, and that resisted the distress ink over that, masked those objects, and didn't allow any color to get on top of those. Now, I've only used the clear, but I wanted to show you a few places where I could have used the colors, and that is on this troll card, those little jewels. That would have been adorable had I had all the colors at that time, to put them over those, and then I could have distress inked around those, and that would have been a nice bright bold shiny color to put on those. At the same time, it's masking off. So next I want to talk about embossing powders. Now this is a great way again to mask off and have it in a non-removable form. Now I like to use my embossing powders through stencils and things like that, but you can also use your embossing powders to mask off your sentiments, or you can use them to mask off symmetrical stamps. So now I have a stamp on my block. It's one I'm going to use later on. I didn't want to switch it out, but you would need a symmetrical stamp for this. What you would do is stamp first in a black dye ink, color your image in, then flip your stamp over, use Versamark ink, stamp it over from the back side of the image over your image that you've colored in. Then you can heat emboss over that, and you've got a nice solid area that's going to mask off your image. Then you can add distress inks over that. You can add watercolor, gelatos, whatever color you might want to over that. That embossing powder will resist it. Now again, this will work with any color embossing powder you might want to use. My favorites though are the white and the clear. Now for your embossing powder, you're going to need a few tools, of course. You need a nice sticky ink pad. I like the Versamark ink pad. You'll also need a heat tool, And then something that's optional is your anti-static tool or this little powder bag that I have. Again, it's optional, but it makes it a little bit easier. Now, a few cards where I've done this technique is this little guy right here. I use the Holiday Border die set from Craftin Desert Divas. And I put a little bit of Versamark ink through that die cut. And then I went ahead and heat embossed in white. I was able to distress ink over that. Then I added that nice little border back on top, and it created kind of like a shadow. Now on this one, this is more of a resist technique where I put it through the stencil, but I wanted to show you just how well that embossing powder resists all of that ink you put over it and how well it will mask your stamped images. This is one that I put through the Snow Flurry stencil, heat embossed in clear onto white cardstock, then put some blue distress ink over that. So very simple and easy to do, and very easy to use your embossing powders as masking tools. The next tool I want to talk about is computer paper. This is one of my favorite tools to use in my masking. This has so many uses. You can die cut it, you can hand cut it, you can use the straight lines, you can use it for so many different things. Now, one of my favorite ways to use this is actually with my die cuts, but like I said before, you can also use this with your scissors, cut some nice hill borders, cut some nice clouds. I wanted to show you a few places where I use this actually with hand cutting. That's on this card right here that I showed you before. I just cut a nice little oval and did a hill border and a sky as well. On this one, I did a wavy line to create some grass and sky. And then I'll show you how I did the road in a minute. Now I want to talk about your dies, and this is one that kind of goes along with computer paper because you don't necessarily want to use the actual dies on hand. You want to be able to die cut them from your computer paper. Now this makes some amazing masks, and it's a great way to really stretch your dies and get some more use out of them. So a few places where I've used this again is this card here where I use that ornaments die from the Holiday Border die set. And then one of my favorite things to do is actually cut the scallops from some computer paper, use some distress ink over them, and create clouds in a nice background like I did on this card. Now, because this is one of my favorite techniques, I could probably show you a million examples of this, but here's another card where I used that same stitch scallop die set and created that nice little blue background of clouds on this card where I used the Angel Kisses stamp set. I added some gold embossing powder, and this was a very simple card to make. Next up is this little card where I used the circle die and also those same stitch scallop dies to create the entire background. I created a nice big moon, then masked that off and created some nice black and gray clouds behind there for a nice night scene, which is a little bit of a change. Now, not only can you just use your die cuts to create these great backgrounds, but you can also layer them up with different products. So on this next card I want to show you, I used a stencil die cut that I used as a mask, but then I overlaid a pattern stencil on top of that to create some more interest inside that nice little sun that I had created. So think outside the box, layer up your die cuts with stencils, and really add some interest to the backgrounds of your cards. Now the next products I want to talk about are painter's tape and washi tape. Both of these are staples in my craft room for so many different reasons, but they are great for masking. Now, painter's tape is a little bit more forgiving than your washi tape, but your washi tape will resist distress inks. It's great for masking those type of things. Very not completely wet mediums, but your painter's tape is really great for all your mediums and also watercolor. So it's one of my favorite ways to mask out borders for watercolor and kind of keep those edges nice and crisp and white. Now I use this all the time in masking to create horizon lines like you'll see in this card here. I used the unicorn stamp set from Craftin Desert Divas to create a nice window scene, and I used that painter's tape to make that horizon line you see there in the background. Again, for this next card, I used the brand new Arctic Pal stamp set. I used painter's tape to make that nice crisp line for where the water is on that card. Then on this next card, which I keep pulling out that is full of masking, I used the painter's tape for the sky and the horizon line on that as well. Now my next card. is another horizon line, and this is one of those things that I could pull out a million examples and show you. I used it on this sloth card to make that horizon line between the little sloth, the ground he's laying on, and that night sky. Next up is a little bit different. I used it to mask off the border around this die cut to keep that edge nice and white, and I also used it to mask out that road in the center to make those nice straight lines. But it's great for so much more than straight lines. You can mask out nice striped backgrounds. You can mask out little objects and stencils. I believe it was Tony that did little trees with this stencil. She just used straight lines to create some triangles and then put in those little patterns. It was so adorable. So the last product I want to talk about is Post-it Notes. Now you can get the small ones, you can get the large ones, you can get the extremely large ones, the full sticky back. They're all great. They all have their purpose. I personally like the itty bitty ones myself, but I also pull out the bigger ones for larger objects that I need to stamp. Now these are great for stamping out little images. They kind of replace your masking paper, I guess you could say, because they have that removable sticky back. You just need to make sure that you're stamping on that kind of sticky part of the Post-it note. Now another great thing that I use these a lot for are masking different die cuts, and I'll show you how I did that in a few of my cards here. Now one of the cards I just showed you is this card with the Arctic Pals stamp set, but on the background and down in that shaker part, you can see the different die cuts that I used. Now these are all different colors, and the way I do that is I take my Post-it notes, I mask off those individual objects, then I sponge over with Distress ink and get these great, beautiful die cuts that are all different colors, and it's so simple and easy to do. I've done this on a ton of cards, but I just wanted to show you this one. So now that I've went over all these different types of masking, I want to show you how to use them, and I couldn't fit it all into one card, so I'm going to show you how I made two different cards with all these types of masking. For both of these cards, I will be using the Monster Carnival stamp set that you see here. I'm going to use two different images today. The first one I want to start out with is that little monster in the center right there. That looks like he's jumping and he's got the little balloon in his hand. Now I have the Crazy Stitch Frames die cut. This is the medium rectangle that's in that set, and I die cut it from watercolor paper. I'm going to go ahead and stamp my stamp right in the top center there. I'm using waterproof black dye ink here, and now that I've got my stamp on my back there, I'm going to go ahead while I have some ink still left on that and stamp it onto masking paper. Now if I would have been thinking, I meant to use Post-it notes here because I only cut out the bottom half of that. This is one of those cases where a Post-it note is almost easier to use rather than the masking paper, especially when you just need kind of a half or something like that of an image. So once I had that done, I went ahead and pulled off the backing paper, put that over the stamped image, masked off both sides of him with some washi tape, and used that little grass image from the Scene Builder stamp and stamp that right down onto the bottom of it. I went ahead and colored this in off camera, but I used my Prismacolor pencils, and then over the top of that balloon I went ahead and put a little Glossy Accents. I'm going to let that dry, and I did let this dry overnight, and now over the image itself I'm actually going to put liquid Frisket. Now this I would actually wait and put this on or I would actually wait to color, I guess I should say, and then once this liquid Frisket comes off, then go back in and color, because this will remove a little bit of your color. For this I didn't mind so much, and I was already coloring in the balloon. I went ahead and did it. Now it does take off a little bit of color like I said, but you basically, if you just want to wait and color afterwards, that's going to be your best bet. So I'm using my tiny little paintbrush here to go ahead and paint right over that image. You can see it goes on white, but here it's set overnight and dried, and now it's a nice clear. You can't even see it. Unless I was to tilt it in the light, then you would see the shine. Now over this I'm going to do a little bit of watercolor. I've got some mowed lawn and some tumbled glass for my little sky there. This is a very simple scene that I'm watercoloring. And then I've got a little bit of Mermaid Lagoon that I'm going to come in and darken up those edges. There you can see how well that has masked off that little guy. And now I'm going to zoom you in and bring in my little eraser or my adhesive eraser and pull off all of that masking fluid that's stuck on there. You can see it's pulling up that little bit of color, but like I said, if you just wait to color afterwards, that's going to stop that and prevent that from happening. Now I'm taking my time here. You want to make sure that your image is completely dry when you do this, or you will rip your paper. And then you just want to go slowly and just start rolling it up like you see I'm doing here. And then once you get down to the end, it's going to kind of roll up into this little ball. You can just pick it up, or it'll pick up with that eraser, and you can toss it. Now I just added a little flag banner to the bottom of this, popped on a few Nuvo crystal drops, attached that to an A2 card base, and this card was finished. This was a very quick and simple little birthday card to quickly pull out. This is just one that I needed to plan accordingly because I did have to wait for that Glossy Accents and the masking fluid to dry. Now this next one I wanted to make as flat as possible using all of my masking tools. So the first thing I'm doing is die cutting some masks here with different dies. I use the Inside Scallop Circle die. I use the Outdoor Landscapes 2 die set to cut the grass border, and now I'm using the Stitch Scallops die set to die cut this that I will use as a cloud border. Now I use computer paper to do all of my die cutting. That is the best way I find to do my masking. Cardstock is a little bit too thick to press through distress inks and things like that. I find computer paper is just the right width. Now to create my scene, I went ahead and made a nice line in between the top and bottom with some painter's tape. I like to use my T-square ruler when I do that so I make sure it's nice and straight. And now I'm going to start with making my little masked area, my little circle scene here. So I've got the Monster Carnival stamp set again, and I'm going to stamp this little guy right in the center of that circle area that I have masked off. Now I went ahead and used the leftover ink to stamp it onto some masking paper. Went ahead and placed that mask after I fussy cut right over the stamped image, and now I'm going to use my other mask that I die cut to create this nice little scene. So I first put down the grass border, and now I'm going to use that cloud border or the scallop border to create some clouds with some Salty Ocean distress ink. I just pull the distress ink right over the top of that, and that is going to create those nice little cloud-like effects in the sky background. Now that grass border, I'm going to go ahead and pull up some blue from the bottom of there just to create that nice definitive horizon line. Now the grass border, I'll go ahead and put the top, kind of position it right in before I move the bottom. That's just going to make sure that everything stays nice and aligned. It's a little trick that I like to do. And then I'll sponge in some mowed lawn distress ink to create my nice grass right on the bottom there. Now I wanted to go ahead and use that circle, the inside of it, to cover up the scene. I removed the outside circle, and now I'm going to sponge in some worn lipstick distress ink, and this is going to create some nice colored cardstock that is completely around my scene. Here you can see I'm just sponging this on. I'm not being too careful, but I'm using my fingers to hold down that circle. Now if you wanted to, you could use rubber cement there before you did any of your sponging, but I just went ahead and put a little bit of rolled up painter's tape right on the back and held everything in place. Now what I wanted to do was actually use that scalloped edge to create a frame. So I put the center of that right back in place, and now I'm going to take some black soot distress ink, and the outside portion of that I went and put down, so I covered up all the pink area as well. And I'm using washi tape to hold everything in place so it doesn't move around on me. But I'll sponge through some black soot distress ink, and that's going to create a nice little scallop frame that's all the way around my scene. Now this is one of the reasons I love to use computer paper instead of cardstock, and that is because it's so easy to push through any type of ink. So it's not, the cardstock gets a little bit too thick, especially with multiple layers if you're layering up different die cuts, and it's really hard to push through that ink. The computer paper is nice and thin, so you can layer and layer and layer. Once I pull that off, you could see I had a really nice scallop frame there. But next up, I want to do the bottom portion of my card. So I wanted to make sure that I had a place for my sentiment, so I die cut a flag banner from some computer paper, and I needed to hold that in place in the center, so I put some rubber cement on the back of that and placed it down right in the bottom center of that card panel. That's going to hold it in place. I put an acrylic block on top just to give it a little dry time, but it doesn't take more than a few minutes. Now over that, I'm actually going to use this sorted shape stencil from Craftin Desert Divas. It's brand new this month, and I'm going to go ahead and put on a nice little circle background. Now for this type of stencil that has all these great little assortments on it, I like to use a makeup sponge to sponge through these. So I cut half of it off, and then I just kind of fold it up into a little circle on one end, and then I just sponge through that stencil. Now I'm going to have to move this halfway down my cardstock once I get through, but it's very easy to see through and line this up. Then I can just sponge through the rest of those little holes to fill out the remaining section of that card panel on the bottom there. Now I need to go ahead and add some color where my sentiment is going to be, so I went ahead and removed that stencil. I'll go ahead and place the outer portion of that flag banner right on top, and then I can sponge through some of my squeezed lemonade distress ink. Now I am going to go ahead and use my other half of my makeup sponge that I cut off, and this is great for those little teeny tiny places, especially those little points that I need to get in and sponge into. Now whenever you're using rubber cement, I didn't have it this time, but whenever you pull it up, you might have a little bit of residue left behind. All you need to do is take your finger and rub over that, or your adhesive eraser, or a dry cloth, and that'll remove any of that leftover residue left behind. Now to finish this card off, I just stamped in that sentiment right in that flag banner, popped this onto an A2 card base, and added a few enamel accents. Again, this was another really simple, easy birthday card that turned out completely flat because of all the masking techniques I used on it. Now here's a final look at both of those cards that I did today, and thank you so much for sticking with me through this long video. I hope you guys learned a little bit more about masking. There are a few links you can click on down below. If you're interested in the supplies I use, they will be over on the Craftin Desert Divas blog. That link will be in the description box below. Thanks for watching.